I'm not sure how, but somewhere along the way, someone at my dad's work convinced my older brother he should play Age of Empires. I seem to also remember Wolfenstein being in the mix, but our PC was incapable of running anything beyond the likes of an RTS. With a totally legal burned CD copy in hand, I came to play the seminal game. As a result, my love for history blossomed. A decade removed from the Ensemble Studios' developed classic franchise, I can still recall the campaigns, the canned lines of dialogue my brother and I would jokingly repeat, the cheat codes to get lumps of food and stone in your storage, pepperoni pizza and quarry, the countless hours I spent replaying the stories of the Babylonians and Saracens, reading the plentiful historical documentation. Because of Age of Empires, I know Eric the Red, William the Conqueror, and the Viking explorers who first set foot in the Americas. It begins with a dream. Fields of grain, blue skies, a peaceful land. Quickly, the fantasy is snatched away with an image of a severed head and a man screaming Thors. A towering figure he snaps from an illusionary bliss. His reality is that of a bloody and desperate naval battle on the cold seas of northern Europe. Alongside a mountain of a man who wields an axe, the duo rip through enemy forces like heroes from a Muso action game. Thors leaps from boat to boat, slaughtering. If the name of Thors or Thorkill don't ring a bell, you've probably heard of Floki. Like the Romance of the Three Kingdoms, this tale is a dramatized version of our world's history. Thors is war-weary. Thorkill stops reveling in the twirling limbs to notice as much. Impaling a man who utters the name Maria in his final breath, this unstoppable killer is tired of an all-too-familiar scene. He tumbles overboard with an enemy soldier, once again piercing a chest with cold iron. Thors pauses in the freezing Scandinavian seas, and as the blade he just took another life with plunges into the depths, he swims off. Not to battle, but to shore, refusing to look back at the carnage, instead leaving this life of violence behind in hopes of finding that peaceful dream somewhere in this bleak world of carnage and suffering. This is Vinland Saga. 15 years on, we meet a much different Thors. He's a family man, living the simple life of a farmer and town chieftain. It's far from the golden land of opportunity and his dream, though. On this rocky tundra, farmland is covered in snow. Every single sheep and cow carries the value of 10 from more hospitable land. Life where even the summers can be bitter cold, there is no guaranteed tomorrow. Still, together with his wife Helga, Thors can raise their children Ylva and Thorfinn away from his past. The children of the village can gather around the fire at night and hear tales of adventure from Leif Erikson. Legends of a better land where the indigenous population live in a bountiful paradise. Rather than fighting over the resources, people coexist in harmony. Now, let's pause for a second and recognize that the dreamland Thors and his people hope for is North America. That to discuss the relationship between European cultures and their arrival in the Americas means we have to acknowledge the very ugly outcome of such. Politically charged material is no stranger within Studio Wit, as their mega hit Attack on Titan certainly courted plenty of it. The controversy surrounding such, the manga author Hajime Isayama's political views, and the similarities to Japan's history as an empire are well documented at this point. There are stronger and more knowledgeable voices out there than mine on the matter. Colonization and imperial expansion lies within the DNA of these stories. Angry boys wanting to take vengeance and venture out into the world as if it was solely for them to discover. Just to name a handful of ways in which the two overlap. I am, however, more comfortable speaking to the history of America. Vinland Saga dangles it as a hopeful future in the distance to keep its protagonists motivated through the many hardships they face. Of course, it took Attack on Titan 3.5 seasons to drop the facade, so maybe that happens with Vinland Saga. I haven't read the manga, but I have not heard of any such issues. What I will say is Studio Wit's latest creation doesn't seem all that interested in addressing the fact that the arrival of Europeans in present-day America, as facilitated by the explorers in this very show, led to the expulsion and near genocide of numerous indigenous cultures. Hell, when Thors describes Vinland, he claims it to be a land free of war and slavery. An irony not given much notice. But this is, however, a story with themes of how humans are seemingly doomed to repeat a cycle of violence. You could consider that a condemnation of real-world eventualities, but maybe that's me being optimistic. In the village, Thors and Leif speak in a dour tone. A cold winter approaches, and the reality that one day there might be one that swallows everyone in the village is an ever-present threat. Throughout the episode, the elders remind the youth how hard life is in this land. Stories of soul survivors, the tumultuous temper of Mother Nature, and ancestors fleeing tyrants. Thors doesn't speak much of his past, but every decision he makes is influenced by the weight of the many lives he's snuffed out. When Ylva discovers an escaped slave on the verge of death, Thors takes the man into his home. When the slave owner invades that space with a cadre of armed men, Thors stands, towering over them, asking how much the slaver paid for the man. Willing to double the amount, he could simply demolish every last one of them. Instead, he chooses to remain peaceful and gives far more than the slaver could ever imagine getting for a man on the verge of death. Thors is principled. He knows this poor soul has mere hours to live, all the more reason to comfort him and let him pass as a free man. The choices Thors makes, while followed, don't go unquestioned. Ylva wonders why they have to make life harder for themselves by choosing not to live like the other nearby villages. Thorfinn doubts his ancestors or father would ever run from a fight, and questions why they must keep struggling to live so far north. Vinland Saga is a show about Vikings killing each other and everyone around them, yes, but it's also about the vulnerable, about their will to keep pushing, and if justice will ever favor them. While life seems peaceful for Thors and his village, the tragic future appears on the horizon. If you've read or seen any promotional material, you know Thors' life comes to an end in part of his refusal to kill, as the world cares little for his idealism. This thrusts Thorfinn into the role of revenge-seeking protagonist as he falls in with a very band of mercenaries who murdered his father, leaving us with a question: when the world is so unjust and your guiding morals seem to only fail you, what then? We're going to do something a little unconventional for a one-episode test and dig further into the series. Recognizing the many strengths of Vinland Saga from its first 24 minutes is easy enough, but it's a more methodical anime than most. This is, after all, an adaptation of a manga that has spanned 22 volumes over 14 years of publication, with the purpose of telling an epic fit for the names of Norse legend. The pacing is therefore slower than most seasonal shows, so to really dig into the meat of it, we're going to have to discuss some latter portions of the anime. Spoilers, I guess. Thorfinn isn't the main focus of episode 1, but after the time skip post episode 4, he lives in juxtaposition to everything we've witnessed. Our heroes aren't peaceful idealists, but those who have had blades ripped through them both physically and mentally. Thorfinn's relationship with Askeladd and his band of mercenaries isn't as simple as hunting them down. He spends much of his formative years living with killers. Day by day, he bends his moral code for a chance at revenge, committing increasingly heinous acts until one day he looks around as he helps Askeladd's group raid a village and realizes he's become the very thing he swore vengeance against. Painfully aware of it all, Thorfinn despises himself just as much as Askeladd. Vinland Saga isn't this cynical story that kills off the pacifist because such idealism isn't realistic. It does so to create a believable world where good people get crushed under the wheels of tyranny, mass violence, and injustice. More importantly though, how we learn to adapt, but not compromise ourselves in order to survive. When all seems lost, how do we come back? Or do we give in, blurring the lines between us and the systems we once rallied against, assimilating and suffocating within? Sadly, such is the future for the young, hopeful child. Thors was his law, his god and his hero, but the very foundations are raised, and before we know it, Thorfinn is in a reality antithetical to what is set up in this first episode. Admittedly, I have not been watching as many new anime this year as I've done in the past, in part because I felt burnt out after watching 20 plus premieres per season and realizing most is nothing of note. I'm not sure Vinland Saga will live up to the lofty expectations and comparisons, but it's had me pumped to watch from week to week in a way very few anime have done these past couple years. So I remain optimistic that the journey of Thorfinn, as adapted by one of the industry's strongest studios of the last decade, doesn't fizzle out like so many, rather maintaining the raw, visceral emotion it so brilliantly displays for years to come. You know who probably has $1 to spare? You. And you know who could use that dollar? Me. So, why not consider donating to my Patreon? It's the best way to ensure these videos keep on coming. If you do so, you'll get access to bonus posts, as well as have your name listed here like the fine folks who've already donated.